Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I see very less number
Good
of
afternoon,
students
ma'am.
this time. Why is not everybody joining in for the classes?
Festival, ma'am. Maybe because of that.
Okay, so how long this festival lasts?
Ma'am, Navratri for 9 days, ma'am. This Thursday is last, ma'am. And then after that, Dashera. 15th is on 15th. Dashera is there.
Okay. So Navratri is the day last, yes?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am. This Thursday is last day, ninth day of the puja.
okay. You only have off holiday on 15th, no? Friday is off.
Ma'am, Friday
Yes,
is.
ma'am.
So for this week, we only have one class for tomorrow left. Even Thursday, we don't hold a class. We don't have one. So please ask everybody to please join in for tomorrow. And also for this class, make sure you are present because otherwise you will not follow students. It will be very hard for you to understand. We'll have to rush with the syllabus because we are left with so much of the topics. So make sure you are present in the class at least. Any which way, I'll just um, give you 3-4 minutes more and thereafter we'll start the class. Let people join in. Yes, students, shall we start the class?
Yes,
Let
ma'am.
me share the PPT with you. First, I'll send you on the chat box, then we'll share. So yesterday we were discussing about the law of the sea, and thereby we discussed one diagram wherein I asked you to read this convention of law of the sea in regards to territorial waters. And for your question yesterday in regards to what is the difference between maritime belt, maritime zone, or territorial waters or territorial sea. So all these terminologies are interrelated. So these are actually synonyms. So maritime belt is territorial sea and it is also called territorial waters. So maritime belt, maritime and maritime zones are different. Maritime zones are all these zones: continental shelf, territorial waters, and high seas, etc. Right? So yesterday, while you were getting confused in regards to this, we were discussing the name for the territorial sea and territorial waters. It is also called maritime belt. And also, one of you raised the question in regards to that whether maritime law is the same as law of the sea. So yesterday also I told you we are actually learning about international laws. So international laws is somewhat in direct relation to the law of the sea because it has external out, it includes seas, oceans, everything, and outer space as well. International law consists of everything. That is what we read before, right? So again, if we talk about this international law and maritime law, these are two different things. But right now we are studying specifically law of the sea in relation to international laws. So international law hereby is we are trying to connect maritime law with international law in this regard. That how maritime law is interrelated with the nation states, right? We are actually discussing laws of the nations, how these laws interact, how these laws come about, right? So, international law, again, we are specifically studying about law of the sea, and maritime law is a larger has a larger scope in relation to the laws related to the sea and oceans. It also consists of private law into it. So private international law is a part of maritime law as well. So how do two states may have contracts? Maybe agencies, various agencies or ships of those agency can have interconnection between them, right? So this is all covered in maritime law. Is it clear? So yesterday we were talking about the two uh, conferences and the third conferences on law of the sea. This is about 1982 conference, wherein uh, which was adopted finally as the law, UN conference on law of the sea, right? So we are going to read more about UN Convention on Law of the Seas and what is this? That is the current status. And before that, we had two conferences, which there was through which we have four conventions. That is the Convention on Territorial Sea and Continental Continuous Zone. The second one is Convention on High Seas, right? And Also, we have Convention on Continental Shelf and Convention on Fishing and Conservation of Living Resources. So these are 5 conventions about which we are going to read in Law of the Sea. Okay. Are you able to see the PPT, students?
Yes,
Firstly,
ma'am.
have you received the PPT? Yes. So firstly, what is Law of the Sea about? So Law of the Sea is in relation to a nation of the states that deals with transport, resources, and environment. So these are 3 sources about what we are going to study in these conventions and how these conventions help and aid other, all the nations of the world, nations in particular, to deal with these sources and resources, how to manage and utilize them under the law of the sea, right? So, firstly, transportation, how transportation takes place, navigation cables, pipelines, how are we going to formulate laws in regards to navigation through the sea, the cables, the pipelines, that is the transportation. Thereafter we have resources. How do we formulate resources into uh, you know uh, how do they regulate resources and usage of these resources in regards to which are related to the sea, and they are important for all the nation states, right? So thereafter, there are mineral resources, oil, gas, fish, renewable energies. So all these are the resources upon which laws and regulations are made for the in relation to how we can extract these resources from the seas. And lastly, the environment, pollution, dumping, and special protected areas. So these, how environment is to be protected and regularized, is done through these conventions, and all the nation states have to follow it. And this is in relation to the sea and seabeds and the coastal areas. Okay. Thereafter, we discussed about the conventions that are in the law of the sea. That is, number 1 is Law of the Sea Conventions of 1958. So these 4 conventions were adopted in 1958 to 1962. Okay. These are, I just discussed, Convention on Territorial Sea and the Contiguous Zone, Convention on High Seas, Convention on Fisheries, Conservation of Living Resources of the High Seas, and Convention on Continental Shelf. So all these 4 conventions were actually a product of 2 international UN conferences held in Geneva in 1958 and 1961. Okay. And another convention which we will be which is much more accepted is UNCLOS, that is UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982. So we'll be discussing more and giving more emphasis on this convention. Okay. So thereafter we discussed what are the zones. This is also called maritime zones in the law of the sea. So there are internal waters that are basically in the coastal areas. Then there is territorial seas. Then there is contiguous zone. Then there is exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, high seas, the international seabed. So one by one, we'll be discussing about all of them. And thereafter, we'll try how these zones get affected while we are dealing with resources and navigation and transportation. etc. through an environment, through these conventions, how these areas or zones have an impact on dealing with other nation states, right? So this is what we discussed yesterday. So this is the land area. This is the territorial sea, that is up to 12 nautical miles from the coastal area towards the water body. This before this is the internal waters. After this is the contiguous zone, that is again up to 12 miles, so 12 nautical miles, right? And from the land to this is 200 miles in total, okay? And from here, contiguous zone to the deep sea bed, we have towards the higher seas, we have exclusive economic zone, okay? And there we have the continental shelf, which is after the contiguous zone, which is still a part of the landmass, which may be identified a part of land of the main area. And thereafter we have the high seas. High seas is beyond the economic zone, exclusive economic zone. Clear? So this is again one diagram which tries to prove the point that how is he going to differentiate between the areas. Are you able to see the PPT, students? Are you following? Yes, class? This is what we discussed yesterday. So this is about the jurisdiction of the internal waters. That is, again, internal waters flows automatically from sovereignty exercised over the land territory. So it is a part of the land and it has no outside control. Thereafter, territorial sea has control up to 12 nautical miles, except for the rights of the innocent passage. This is what we discussed yesterday, that innocent passage is provided to the foreign vessels, for foreign shipping vessels, and they have the right to passage because of the usage and custom or tradition which is in particular, but they cannot come into the territory of the internal waters, right? When they have, because that is a part of the boundary of the nation state and it should be exclusively used for them, whereas the foreign vessels can access their right to passage over the territorial seas, the territorial waters, right? And also they cannot do the same for the high seas. So high seas are different, and trade and commerce and navigation is free for them. Okay. So again, while we are discussing territorial waters, territorial seas, we are going to discuss about, firstly, what is the breadth of the territorial sea. Breadth is, again, the determination is done with, I told you, with the cannon of shot. While the cannons were shot previously before in around 18th century. So as far as the cannon used to go, they used to decide that would be the breadth of the territorial sea, right? But now it is fixed to 12 nautical miles. That is done through this convention, 1982 convention, right? So thereafter, the second thing that we are going to discuss hereby is the rights of the states over their territorial seas. So again, a coastal state has to exercise their rights, and they don't hold the full sovereignty again because of the right to innocent passage. So as we discussed yesterday, that innocent passage is is in order to protect its peace and security. only and only shipping vessels are permitted, and otherwise the coastal state or the state which has this whose territorial sea it belongs to has control that if there is some point of time they have they suspect that they might carry some dangerous substance, maybe some nuclear substance. For nuclear substances they have to carry some documentation and some licensing is done. And also if there is some arms and ammunition, then it is not considered to be the part of they are not supposed to have the right to innocent passage. Similarly, even the warships are not permitted to have the right to innocent passage over the territorial seas, right? So did you follow until here? Yes, class. Did you follow the territorial sea?
Yes, ma'am.
So moving on to the contiguous zone. So as I told you, after territorial sea, up to 12 nautical miles from the territorial sea and up to 24 nautical miles from the coast, it is the contiguous zone. Okay. So what is contiguous zone? So the concept of contiguous zone was developed because of the inability of the coastal states to ensure effective protection and also to have economic interests or maybe other interests due to limited area offered to the territorial sea that was just up to 12 nautical miles. So for this contention, this convention of 1982 provided that contiguous zone may extend up to 24 nautical miles from the baseline or the coast, again from which the breadth of the territorial sea is measured. Okay, so the area of contiguous zone is 12 plus 12 from the baseline, and from territorial sea it is 12 nautical miles. So again, in the contiguous zone, the coastal state can control, again, to prevent the infringement of its customs, fiscal and immigration or sanitary regulations, and also punish the infringement of such laws, right? So it is more like territorial sea and imposing certain restrictions on the freedom of the high sea as well. So it is also important to note that the jurisdictional nature of the contiguous zone is distinct from territorial sea. So because again the coastal states do not have to exercise sovereignty in the contiguous zone. Only and only jurisdiction in regards to the revenue collection and protection through policing, etc., for the purposes of peace and security is granted to the coastal state. But there is no sovereignty in the contiguous zone. There is partial sovereignty in the territorial zone, but in the internal waters there is full sovereignty. But in the contiguous zone, they can take the benefit of the economic interest or maybe resources and other things, and also can collect customs or revenues, etc. But also immigration and other things, but they can regulate and for the protection and peace of the coastal state, but there is no sense or compulsion to exercise its sovereignty over the contiguous zone. Is it clear? Yes, class, any doubts until now? Shall I move forward?
Ma'am, no, ma'am, no doubts, ma'am.
No doubts, for sure?
Yes, ma'am.
So moving forward to EEZ, that is Exclusive Economic Zone, or we also have it as continental shelf that we'll discuss. So EEZ hereby, as I told you, let me show you the diagram again where it resides. So this whole is the continental shelf. After the contiguous zone, there is exclusive economic zone. So that is above the sea. And behind this, underneath this is the continental shelf. So in here also, in this diagram, you will see it better. So from the continuous zone to the high seas, we have the EEZ, that is exclusive economic zone. And underneath, we have the continental shelf. Okay. From the contiguous zone to the deep sea bed. Again, then there is continental slope and then there is continental rise. So how the land behind or beneath the continuous zone and also towards the high seas is called the exclusive economic zone, and beneath it we have the continental shelf, we have the continental slope and the continental rise towards the seabed. Did you all follow? What basically we are talking about, the thing that is we are going to discuss about the rights of the nation states over this exclusive economic zone as well as on the continental shelf. Is it clear with the diagram? Any questions about this EEZ and continental shelf?
Ma'am?
Yes, yes.
Ma'am, from this particular unit, how hypothetical question will come like this ocean zones?
So for this again, hypothetical question will be in regards to how, we'll give you an example, or you can say I'll make a draft of a fictitious case that you will have to decide. For example, while we were discussing about, if you remember the Corfu Channel case, we discussed it in regards to the right of passage and Corfu Channel case, right? So again, I will draft it on the basis again, for example, if whether warships can pass to the territorial seas. We just got to know that it is not permitted that warships will have to pass through the territorial sea, right? So the question will be in this format only. One state wants to use its right of passage over the territorial waters of another state, but they have to carry a warship vessel, whether it is legitimate, whether they can take the legitimate defense of the same or not, decide. So this would be one sort of example on the right of passage. And also while we are talking about usage of resources, so again, if we talk about, for example, if there is maybe say some dispute in regards to the area of the breadth of the territorial sea, for example. So maybe with the geographical indications, you will have to decide whether you can say one nation state tries to acquire the territorial waters of another state, considering it to be not a part of the territorial sea. Then again, you will have to quote an example that it is up 12 nautical miles and the normal coastline is supposed to be this and it cannot go beyond that. Okay? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you follow? Don't worry, we'll discuss the case laws. Then you will be able to understand it better. Right now, I am trying to explain you the concept with the terminologies. Please try and focus on that so that you are able to understand these concepts, because these concepts have a different terminology. That is why it is hard to grasp. It is hard to absorb. So I am explaining it through the medium of diagrams and this, images, so that it is for better understanding, right? So while we are talking about exclusive economic zone, we just discussed that it is what is above the sea, or what is below the sea is the continental shelf. So again, exclusive economic zone is no longer a part of the special, you can say, high seas. So coastal states can also establish a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone and claim a continental shelf, or may not claim the continental shelf that is below the sea, that is area, that is landmass that is below the sea. So the coastal state have the right to use of the living and non-living natural resources. Okay, so to use EEZ and the continental shelf for economic purposes, and the right to construct, authorize and regulate such construction of artificial islands and certain installations and structures, right? So this concept of EEZ is basically for, for the claim of the condition that what is the length and breadth of the usage of resources. So up in EEZ, one coastal state who has up to 200 nautical miles can, exercise its right to use living and non-living resources that are in the area of the EEZ as well as continental shelf. That is for economic benefits, right? So continental shelf is again, it is like continental shelf is like a state territory only. How it is a state territory? Because it is like the land which is beneath the seabed, which is a submerged landmass maybe, right? So the concept of the continental shelf, is mainly correlated with the usage and exploitation of natural resources from the sea, which is adjacent to the territorial sea. So it is therefore of little importance that until such exploitation, became technically possible. So this concept had acquired a significant, and you can say a very relevant, through the proclamation that was laid that natural resources do underlie in many parts of the continental shelves of the coast, right? So the coastal states can exercise and exploit living and non-living natural or non-natural resources of under the seabed, that is the continental shelf. That is again a landmass of the coastal state, that is the state territory of the coastal state, right? So the concept of the continental shelf had acquired prominence through the Geneva Conventions, right, in 1958. So the concept became a part of international law as well. So continental shelf is more like, as I told you, a part of the state territory of the coastal state. And they have all the rights, the legal rights to exploit its natural resources and use it for the economic purposes. And also in regards to navigation and, overflight or other submarines, cables, pipelines. So the coastal states have all the freedoms to access these in their exclusive economic zones without any revenue or customs. Is it clear? Exclusive economic zone and continental shelf. Any questions so far? No questions? Did you all follow? No response? Shall I continue, students?
Yes, ma'am. You can continue, ma'am.
Okay. So this was about continental shelf and exclusive economic zone. Again, this was important. This was realized that continental shelf existed, and it is an important aspect of the territory of the coastal state. It was identified in the first time through, as I told you, in the Geneva Convention of 1958. That is in regards to continental shelf, Convention on continental shelf. And again, continental shelf is like a seabed and a subsoil that is basically used by submarines and also maybe used for navigation purposes and pipelines. Okay. And thereafter, even 1982 convention declared that, the coastal states have rights over the area of the continental shelf because of its natural existence and natural promulgation of its territory, land territory of the coastal state. And even if the sea existed above it, it is, ab initio or ipso facto part of the sovereignty of the nation state or the coastal state and can possess its rights over the land of the seabed. Okay, under the seabed, where one nation state can exploit the resources. So in short, the coastal state has an inherent right over the EEZ as well as on the continental shelf. So what are the rights of the states in this regard? So the concept again is highlighted. The uniform continental shelf has up to, again, as I told you, 200 nautical miles. Maybe in some areas there may be not 200 nautical miles, but at least 100 is there for the shorter areas, or you can say the coast with shorter breadths. And thereafter, what are the rights of the states? So, firstly, they have the economic rights. They do not hold the sovereignty. Okay, so states cannot exercise sovereignty over this part of the sea. However, they may exercise rights, sovereign rights over it for the purposes of exploitation of resources and revenue generation. Okay, so the Convention of 1982, that is UNCLOS, gave the rights of this continental shelf for revenue generation and exploitation of natural resources, and the coastal states are required to make payments or contribution in regards to the International Seabed Authority in these cases. So the right of exploring and exploiting such natural resources are exclusive in the sense that if the coastal state is unable to explore or does not want to explore or exploit its resources, no other state may undertake the activities without its express consent. So the rights of the coastal states over the continental shelf do not affect the legal status of the waters or the airspace that is above the waters. So the right to exercise, right over the coastal states, over the continental shelf must not actually forego its rights of a country and interfere with the navigation and others' rights and freedom of the states. The coastal rights are only entitled in order to construct and operate the necessary installations within the continental shelves in accordance with the safeguards. So all states are entitled to lay submarines, cables and pipelines on their continental shelves. However, the right may be exercised only with the consent of the coastal states. Clear, class? So moving on to the topic of delimitation. So as I told you, legal definition, continental shelf extend to 200 miles from the baseline of the coastal state to the outer edge of the continental margin, whichever is further. So thereafter we have fish, and now we'll discuss about delimitation of the continental shelf between two or more states. So as to the delimitation of the continental shelf between two adjacent or opposite states, there has been a lot of controversy. Okay, so Geneva Convention of 1958 had adopted the principle of equidistance. Again, it is also called a special circumstance rule. So, under this convention, the states, in order to determine their body boundaries of the continental shelf by agreement between them. So, while generally, if they share the continental shelf, they have to divide their zones. They have to sign an agreement and allow, on the basis of equidistance principle, as well as for the sake of the Geneva Convention of 1958, right? So, in absence of an agreement, if there is no agreement, if there is in the absence of an agreement, the boundary line is justified by the special circumstances. So, it is done by the principle of equidistance. Okay, from the nearest points of the baselines to the breadth of the territorial sea of each state is measured, and however the prove if this is again a controversy has started over to prove controversial, particularly because of the imprecise nature of the term special circumstance. Okay, so if there is no agreement which is being previously decided by the nation states who share the continental shelf in between them, maybe they are adjacent countries, they have common coastline, or maybe they both are the nation states are opposite to each other and they share the same seabed. So they have to identify the continental shelf and the exclusive economic zone, which is done through the principle of equidistance or the principle of special circumstances, and which has to be proved. And if there is no agreement, generally what people do is the nation states get an agreement done if they share some coastline or they want to access the coastline in that regard. But hereby, if there is no agreement, then the states have to measure on the base. The court has to measure the difference between the breadth of the territorial sea of each state, along with the equidistance principle. They have to divide the equal pace or equal distance from each of the nation state. And this is called the delimitation of the continental shelf between two or more states. Is it clear?
Ma'am.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
So about the exclusive economic zone. So exclusive economic zone or patrimonial sea. It is also called patrimonial sea, which aims to actually secure and protect the states that are coastal in nature, who are coastal, who are present on the coast. Okay, so the coasts have the resources, they have the seabed, they have the subsoil, and irrespective of all these variations of geographically, economically, or ecologically, the concept is advanced by some developing countries in order to offset the economic imbalance created by history in favor of a few powerful nations only. So, the concept was again initiated through the idea that with the establishment of EEZ, there would be the change of character of the high seas, and states will have freedom of fishing, will have guaranteed customary international law in their respective nations, and by the 1958 convention, EEZ is lead to the conversation of the biological resources of the sea or their rational explorations. Okay, so which would mean that if there is non-realization of optical catch, these would be these arguments will be the concept for the EEZ, and in order to prevent making of fishing or making of exploitation of resources on the high seas and monopolizing them by the monopoly being done by the developed countries. So EEZ is having a surplus fisheries, and fishes have these through the economic exclusive economic zone. The coastal states have the rights of fisheries and exploit the other natural resources which they could not do before. Benefit of the same. Is it clear, class? Any questions so far?
Ma'am.
No. So again, last topic that is in relation to navigation, as we discussed about the exclusive right of the internal waters. The territorial sea has a right to innocent passage, and exclusive economic zone there is freedom of navigation as well, right? And similarly, oil, gas, and mineral resources. Internal waters have exclusive rights of exploitation, whereas uh, exclusive economic zone have exclusive rights of exploitation, but has no right of exploitation if there is some conflict with the sea lanes, or you can say the principle of equidistance, or you can say delimitation of the continental shelf. Okay, and also about this cables and pipelines. In the internal waters and territorial sea have exclusive jurisdiction of the coastal state, whereas EEZ enjoys all states enjoy the freedom of laying submarines, cables, and pipelines. Okay, but again, delineation of the course of the laying pipeline subject to the consent of coastal state, right? And the coastal state may lay down conditions for cables and pipelines entering into its territorial seas. So they should carry documentation, and they should come with an agreement before entering the territorial sea of the coastal state. Similarly, about the renewable energies, they have exclusive right of coastal state to build installation and artificial islands. But in EEZ, the right of coastal state to build installation, there is a right for economic use and renewable resources. But for other states to build installation of pipe is necessary only for pipeline. So no right to build installation in artificial islands if conflicting with the sea lanes. So again, if there is no conflict, then they can do, or otherwise they cannot build installations or artificial islands on the areas of EEZ. We also read this, the right of transit passage in straits used for international navigation. So this principle applies generally to all straits connecting high seas or EEZ with other areas of the high sea or EEZs which are used for international navigation. Is it clear? So let me stop here and take the attendance as the time is running. And until then, you tell me if you have any confusion. And tomorrow we'll discuss about the high seas. This is the only topic which is left, and also about the rights and duties of the states, nation states, in relation to the law of the sea. Correct? Any doubts, class?
No, ma'am.
No? Sure?
Yes, ma'am.
Any questions? Again, shall we end the class then?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'll send the class now. Thank you so much. Have a nice day, all of
Thanks,
you.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Most welcome. Bye-bye.